I'm Maya. I'm the co-founder of Hoot Reading, and I'm really excited about our video today. We're going to talk today about how kids learn to read and what are the signs of a good reader and why the most critical time to master reading is between kindergarten and third grade. And I'm really excited about our guest today. This is Miss Lindsay Gustafson. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Maya.
Thank you for joining us. So Lindsay has been one of our Hoot teachers right from the beginning. She's a grade 1 and 2 teacher and a reading recovery specialist. And I'd love her to tell you a little about, your education background and what got you into teaching.
Sure, yeah. So I originally started at the University of Western Ontario. I started out in nursing, actually. So I did 1 year, and I realized I loved the educational part of it and the caring part of it, and that led me to know in my heart that I wanted to be a teacher. So I got my health sciences degree from the University of Western Ontario, and then I got my education degree from the University of Alberta, and since then I have also got my post-baccalaureate education diploma from the University of Manitoba. So I've been teaching in Manitoba for 10 years now. I've also taught for a year in England, and within Manitoba, I have taught K-2 for 6 years. For the past 4 years, I've taught grade 1 and 2, and this is my second year of reading recovery.
Awesome. And you've been with us for some time, and you're always one of our favorites. People always ask for you, ask for Miss Lindsay, my kids included. So we're so happy to have you, and we're really excited to talk more about reading today and giving parents a little bit more from a teacher's perspective and also from a specialist perspective. So Lindsay, most kids start to learn to read in kindergarten, so around the time that they're age 4 to 6, and they start learning the alphabet, and they turn those letters into sounds, and they start getting into real words, which is really exciting as a parent when you get to see that happen. And I know personally, having 2 readers in my house, it can take several years to learn and master that skill. So can you explain, how do we learn to read, and how does reading develop in children?
Yeah, and I completely agree. When you see kids learning about print and starting to tie it all together in those early years of school, it is so exciting to see that light bulb go off. And I think that's why I love teaching reading too. It's so rewarding for teachers, but also for kids. And the cool thing is literacy learning actually begins as young as being a baby. So when babies are holding books and they're learning to turn the pages, they're often looking at the pictures and getting meaning from the pictures. They notice little things like when the pictures are upside down, and those are the very beginning steps of literacy learning. And it is a very long process. It's ongoing, it's continuous and gradual. So every time they're immersed in literacy experiences, they're making new connections, new networks in their brain, and they're hanging on to a little bit more. So I'll refer to Mari Clay. She's the reading recovery guru who developed the reading recovery program in New Zealand, and she developed the literacy processing theory. And so she suggests that it's all about problem solving and getting a message. So as we learn to read, it's always about the meaning, and we're always making meaningful connections to either things that we know from our past, our prior knowledge, our background experiences, to recognizing words that we know, letters that are in our name, and making those meaningful connections. So it is a meaning-making experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we get into what makes that good reader, we can just unpack that a little bit more. So, I researched reading myself. Obviously, starting when I started with Hoot Reading, I realized that it's really complicated and it's not a natural process. So we talked about kids. They talk about how speaking is a very natural, innate process for humans, for everyone across the world. But when we're not naturally wired to read and write. And, for myself as a parent, when you look at the English language, there's all these rules, right? And I don't even remember learning them, but things like the word sure should be spelled with an SH, not SURE. And, read and read may have 2 different meanings, but they're spelled exactly the same way. So, I feel like learning to read is really hard. And why, in your experience, is it so hard for kids? Given all these rules, for some kids it comes really naturally, and for some kids it's hard, and for most kids it's pretty hard learning to read.
And as adults, it's so easy to forget how hard it is and how huge the process of reading is. So it is very, very complex. If you can kind of almost imagine a rope with all of these different strands woven into it, reading basically is about getting information from all different kinds of sources. So there's the visual aspect. So that's looking at print, recognizing letters, what sounds do they make, spelling patterns, looking at punctuation. Then there is structure. So that is the book language we see. The language we see in books isn't necessarily how we talk. So learning about book language or grammatically, what is correct? How would we say things? And then meaning. And like I said, meaning is one of the biggest pieces because we're always making meaning. When students or children are learning how to read, they have to recognize 54 different letters. So that includes the different types of A's and the different types of G's. When they recognize all those different letters, they also have to recognize what sounds those make. But many of those letters make more than one sound, or when they're combined with other letters, they make other sounds. And then of course there's sight words. And as we know, sight words aren't necessarily able to be phonetically sounded out. So they just have to commit those to memory. So much of it is about recalling and retrieving all these different little information pieces from our brain and making connections. So it's all about these pathways and connections and networks in our brain, but it is a very, very complex process.
Right, absolutely. And I think, most parents feel that their kids will learn to read eventually, for sure. But why is that real, like that critical time in those early years, right? So you teach grade 1 and 2, reading recovery is something that happens in grade 1. Why do teachers really stress the importance of reading, especially before grade 4?
So yes, there's that 4th grade slump theory. So the theory is basically that from kindergarten or before up to grade 3, there's such a huge focus on teaching children how to read. So they spend most of their literacy time learning how to decode, how to spell, how to get meaning out of what they are reading. And as we said, that's a very, very long process. So that takes many, many years. But there's this big drastic change that happens usually around grade 4, where children are, expected to know how to read. And then they use that strategy now to learn. So they spent 3 to 4 years learning how to read, and now they are reading in order to learn. So most of the reading grade 4 and beyond is nonfiction text, and that's how they are getting their information. So comprehension has to be much deeper. Fluency has to be very smooth, because if it's very slow and choppy, or they're doing a lot of work decoding, they're not going to get the meaning they need out of that text. Right. So if we don't have strong readers by the end of grade 3, unfortunately, that gap just broadens and broadens, because we have some students still working on the decoding, and then we have other students who are way beyond that, and now they're going deeper into the actual learning. So it's really critical to get that done and established really firmly before grade 4.
And then also, this is why teachers in grade 1 and 2 are talking about reading all the time, right? Because I know in my own experience, when my child's in grade 4, they're not focusing on reading. Like you said, they're starting to go into social studies and math. And, a child who's doing so well, in grade 2 or 3 with certain math problems and those type of things, when they make that leap from learning to read and reading to learn, that's where we kind of see those pieces happen, right? So I know at Hoot Reading, we talk about that all the time. So thank you for breaking that down. And I think you've mentioned a couple words like decoding and fluency. So let's break down reading a little bit more, because I know for some parents, these words are not common. Right. What are the signs of a good reader? If you can kind of go into those pieces for me.
Sure. So when we are assessing and teaching reading, there's mainly 3 aspects that we are looking for. So those are accuracy, comprehension, and fluency. So when we talk about accuracy, that is reading words correctly. So of course we want to make sure words are read correctly. That is a big piece of reading. One thing to note though is reading doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Even as adults, if you go to read a science article or something from a different culture, you might not necessarily know a word. So as an adult, you even take a couple of tries at a word and you think you possibly got it correct. So when we assess accuracy, we usually think of a just right book for a student between 90 to 94, 95%. So
Okay.
we want high accuracy, but it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. So we do look at their accuracy and how they decode. And when I say decode, that is how do they attack an unknown word? Are they finding little words in big words? Are they sounding it out letter by letter? Are they looking for little chunks like SH or CH? So that is part of accuracy. Fluency is really huge. So fluency is how does the reading sound? So we think about the speed and the pacing. We think about, is it choppy, kind of like a robot, word by word? Or is it phrased? Words are strung together. And we also think about expression. So do they attend to those words that are darker and say them louder? Do they raise their voice at the ends of questions? So fluency is really important because in order for a child to read fluently, that means they're integrating all of these other aspects of learning how to read. So they're thinking about the meaning. If they're going to raise their voice at the end of a question or say something loudly, it means that they're understanding what's happening in the story. And as well, if they're reading at an appropriate pace, so as if we were talking, as opposed to word by word, that shows that they're not spending too much brain time trying to solve words. If they're spending too much time trying to solve every single word, that means the text is too hard. And when the text is too hard, they're not going to be able to understand what they're reading. So fluency is a really, really huge piece. And of course, comprehension, and that is meaning. And that is the whole purpose of reading, right? So
I know that we're going to do another video just on comprehension itself, but yeah. You can describe a little bit why it's so important for parents, obviously.
Right, and oftentimes it can be quick and easy to just listen to the reading. Oh yeah, that sounded really good. Okay, let's move on. But it is so, so important to always be checking in with your child to make sure they understand what they're reading. And that's just not recalling the sequence of events, but it's going deeper. So thinking about making predictions, making inferences. Why do you think that happened? Extending the story or relating it to your own experiences, making as much connections as you possibly can. Because as we said before, reading is all about making connections within our brain. We want to strengthen those connections as much as we can. So those are the three main aspects: is comprehension, accuracy, and fluency.
Right. And you talked about fluency, not to go back to that, but I know in our Hoot reading sessions, that's one of the most fun things that I see with my kid continually practicing and using that expression and the explanation marks and the question marks and how you read. So I think, when kids are reading out loud and practicing that fluency and parents can really hone in on expression, it's a fun exercise to do when your kid is
Completely.
Practice. Yeah. Okay. So, and obviously now we're talking about practice and why these three pieces of the good reader. Practice is really important, and this is kind of the spirit behind what we do. So in your opinion, why is practice so important? Why are teachers saying they have to do this every day? They say 10 to 15 minutes out loud. And why out loud? Because we have some parents that say, oh yeah, my kid is reading, and they're sitting there independently reading, but they're not reading out loud to the parent. So talk a little bit why that's so important.
Sure, yeah. And as you said, it does basically touch on that fluency piece. When you're hearing a child read out loud, you're able to see, are they reading with fluency? And again, that's going to tell you, what is their accuracy like? If they're reading fast, that means they are understanding about print. And if they're reading using that expression, then that shows that they're comprehending as well. So that is super important. One thing that I think is very, very, very important is the aspect of familiar reads, especially as a reading recovery teacher, and if you have a struggling student. So we send home familiar books all of the time, and I'm sure some families are probably like, oh no, not Tiger again.
Right.
But there's so much value that comes from it. So especially, as I said, with a struggling reader, one thing that comes from those familiar reads when it's done out loud is the students are being able to be confident and feel successful. They're also able to practice what does good reading feel like? If they're constantly reading new books or books that are borderline hard, they're never able to experience what that fluent reading sounds like. So we want to allow them to practice that as much as possible. The familiar reads also allow deeper connection. So every time that book is read, the child is going to notice something new. So whether it's comprehension or something new in a word that they never noticed before. So much value comes from that.
Yeah, I see that with my own kids. Like when I know for my daughter's homework, they'll read in class and then she'll bring her chapter book home and they're asking us to repeat it. And she's like, oh, I have to read this again. But she's excited to kind of share the next part of the story. She's more confident, all those pieces. And I agree, you're picking up other pieces the same way if you were to watch a movie again, right? You're kind of picking up other pieces.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And that first read that they did in school, they did a lot of brain work, right?
Right.
And then that second or the third read, they're consolidating it. So everything becomes smoother and that processing system in their brain becomes more efficient. So it really, really is very powerful. One caution is the memorized book. So we don't want to have it so familiar that it's memorized, because once it's memorized, then it is no longer purposeful. But there is, like I said, again, so much power in that familiar read.
And maybe with the older kids who are really good decoders, like you kind of mentioned, like we've said, why am my child's in grade 3 or 4 and they're reading, they're reading really well and they're gifted readers or accelerated readers. Why should they continue to read out loud? Is so that the text they're reading is probably a little bit more complicated, right? So they haven't memorized that text. There's no way. It's not like the kind of the early books. So that kind of repeated piece allows for that comprehension. So that makes sense why even parents should be getting their child in grade 3 and 4 to be reading out loud too.
Right. And I think that also opens up so many great conversations. If you're listening to your child read, then you really get a chance to interact with that text with them and help them to appreciate the deeper meaning within the text, right? So you can have a conversation that is meaningful with them. And that I think will just up their joy for reading when they see the purpose in it.
Right. Okay, so going back to, some things that I've seen our Hoot teachers do and things that I do with my own child, let's talk about sight words a little bit. You talked about them and I kind of was explaining my frustration with the word sure and how it's spelled wrong and or it's not spelled phonetically. So could you talk about the importance of sight words and why, kids, especially in that grade 1 and 2 should be, learning all these words quickly?
Sure, yeah. So sight words, those are the most common words that we find in books. So often, especially in grade 1 and 2, we refer to lists such as the 100 frequency words. So those are the words that they're going to see in those early books because they're very, very common, such as the, was, is, said. So especially with early years, very, very beginning readers, they do need to establish, we call them footholds or anchors. So they need just those few words that they're going to recognize right away without having to do a lot of brain work. And that allows them to then free up their mind in order to work on the other words. And, those basic sight words, you're not getting a lot of meaning from them, the or said. So we want those to be recognized right away so that brain is freed up in order to work on the more meat of the text.
Right.
Right. So not necessarily do they need to learn 200 sight words before they need to read a book, but it is really helpful to have just a few in order to start getting those beginning books under their belt.
Yeah, and it gives them that confidence, like you said, they can keep going and understand, get into deeper type of meaning and comprehension when they know those sight words, right?
Exactly. So if they're constantly getting stuck on the word said and they're trying to sound it out letter by letter, that is using up all their brain, and then they're not able to be freed up for the harder work that comes later on.
Right. And even as adults, I feel like, because we've all gone through our reading, every word is almost a sight word for us now because we read so much. It's not until I have to read like, a social studies book or something about dinosaurs where I'm trying to sound out words again. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Okay, so this has been great. I have one last question for you. I know we could talk about so many different topics, so we will be coming back to some more videos with you and some more advice. But parents are always concerned if their child's on track, right? even when they're babies, we're always kind of testing and seeing where they're at. And I know you as an educator in the grade 1 and grade 2, parents are probably asking you all the time, is my child on grade level? Where are they at? Especially if we're worried about, them making sure they're making this progress before grade 3. So how do you identify, reading difficulties? I know that you're a reading recovery teacher. You could talk a little bit about that, but what kind of age should parents be looking at, and what kind of things that they should be looking into if they think there might be something, a little bit deeper there with their child's reading?
Mm-hmm. So I think my main tip would be to always talk to your child's teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So your child teacher is going to not just base their reading assessment on one single day or one single book. They're going to use experiences within a large span of time. Even if we do some things called the running record, which is an assessment, we take into account a lot of factors. Did they have background knowledge on that book? Were they feeling sick that day? Did something happen in their life which affected their reading? So we never base anything on just one single assessment. It's always within a span of time. We do look, we have a range of levels that we do use to gauge. However, it is really important to not get too focused on a level or to push kids through levels. Like I said, we really want to focus on reading being fluent and reading for meaning. And if we just push kids through the levels without attending to those, then that's not helpful either. So I really do think it's important to talk to your child's teacher, and they'll be able to give tips for home, whether some kids might need help with letter identification, some might need help with sight words, some might need help with that fluency piece. So the teacher will really be able to hone in on what aspect you should narrow in on.
Right, for your child, exactly.
Right, yeah, because it is such an individual process. No child learns to read the same. And as much as a teacher, I would love if I could just teach in sequence the alphabet and then teach letters and words in sequence. But it doesn't happen that way. Mm-hmm. Kids are going to hang on to what is meaningful to them. They often learn the letters in their own name first, or they learn to recognize words, the names of their families. So no child goes through this journey the same way. So like I said, it is very individual, and you would want to touch base with the teacher to find out exactly where you can support at home.
Yeah, and I think, even practicing like that 10 to 15 minutes every day, if you're reading with your child or picking a book or a magazine or anything that is drawn to their child, that makes a big difference, right? So a lot of parents, they don't do the practice, and they can't, or they think that their child is ahead. So I think just doing that extra practice makes a big difference, at least from what I've seen, and I know the teachers say, and it's constantly kind of said at our school as well. So
it really is, and we do notice, we can see the extra practice. And if you think about how much more literacy or words children that are reading on a daily basis at home are exposed to in comparison to those who aren't, the difference to amount of words that they are exposed to is absolutely huge. So it really is critical for that 10 to 15 minutes every day. And one quick tip is the importance of bedtime stories.
Okay.
That is one of the best things you can do as a parent. There's so much rich learning that comes from listening to a bedtime story. It could be a chapter book, or it could be a beautiful picture book that you find. There's so many great literature out there. But children learn so much from that. One thing is the joy of reading. They learn to experience reading as a fun thing, right? They need to see the balance between it being a really fun and joyous time, right, and work, right? Because it is hard work. They learn so much about rich language, so using vocabulary and these juicy words that they don't use in their own writing or in those learning leveled books that they start learning with. So exposing them to all of these new words, new vocabulary, new ways of speaking, rhyming, there's so much power that comes in those bedtime stories. So if you can do anything, a bedtime story and 10 minutes of read aloud by your child, I think that is a huge, huge start.
Right. And I know all parents are tired, but everyone's at home right now. So even if you can try to drum up the energy to do that as a ritual or as some sort of routine. That's great. So thank you, Lindsay. That's been great advice. I know that we could talk so much more. So I definitely will have you back. And we're going to talk about comprehension and other pieces of reading. But this has been great. If you guys have liked what you've heard, please make sure that you like our video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we'll see Lindsay again. So thanks, Lindsay, so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Maya.
Bye.